Thank you. I love being in the builder track because I am absolutely a builder at heart. I love showing code. I love showing demos. I'm glad I got a couple extra minutes because that means I get to spend a little more time with you all and dive deeper into some cool stuff that I want to show. This is technically an hour-long talk that I've compressed into like a 30-minute, 40-minute slot. So thank goodness for that. But let's get started. We've got a lot to cover. We're going to go over. Think of this like a primer to choosing your journey on an enterprise AI adventure. We're looking at all kinds of different technologies. The one thing I want you to come away with today is that this is not magic, and you all are capable of it. It's all just math under the covers, and again, it shouldn't be mystical. There should be sound decisions made as you go forth and try and understand what these technologies can do for not only you, but your enterprise and the people who are working with you and how you can get them to adopt it. So that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to dive in a little bit of picking LLMs, the different strategies, different approaches, different kinds of ways you can use these various tools, making the models aware of your data. If you haven't heard the word RAG yet, I don't know at this conference, I don't know where you've been because I think every session I've sat in has said the word RAG, but I'm going to show you one live. I don't know if John has done a good job with his RAG workshop, and I sat in on his talk earlier today. His talks are like deeper dives off of if you took one of my slides about RAG and went really deep, like you're in one of his talks. This will be, again, kind of that surface level, but I'm going to show you some cool stuff. And then there's lots of application frameworks out there. We've seen ones from IBM. We're going to talk about some other ones I enjoy using from the open source world. And then deployment. It's one thing to have it running on your laptop. It's another thing to get this into production and actually be using it for real. And then how do you scale? Like taking that idea and now making it available to 50, 100,000 users is a very different thing than making it available to 10 users in your little work group. Again, the things look different that way. And we'll cover what the key takeaways are, and if there's time, we'll give a little Q&A. If there's not time, I am available on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me, message me. Again, all the private messaging is all open, not a big deal. I'm a very easy to find person. I do have a globally unique name. There are no other Calvin Hendryx-Parkers in the world. If anyone tries to claim that, they are fake and lying to you. Okay, jumping right in with how to pick an LLM. There's a couple of different ways you can use an LLM. Many of us here in the room are probably already using ChatGPT or Claude or various DeepSeek, R1, those kinds of tools online as a service, as opposed to using it as building a product with an API. If you are using these things as a service, it's key to know, if you're using ChatGPT, under the covers you are using, say, the GPT 4.0 model or the 4.5 model or the 0.1 model or 1 mini models, but the ChatGPT service itself is actually guiding your experience. There are differences between using that model as an API call through OpenAI's API and using that model through the ChatGPT interface. There are different guardrails you're getting and a different experience that you're going to be getting in each of those cases. So one thing to be conscious of as you're choosing how you're going to roll out, say, generative AI inside of your organization for people to use it as a chat resource, do those guardrails match your expectations of what you want your people to use? So something to be aware of that I don't think a lot of people kind of have fully wrapped their heads around is you're getting a curated, guided experience when you're using some of these tools. You can use an API and create a different curated, guided experience for your people to use those kinds of tools. It's a key distinction to make. There's different levels of control, different levels of customization, and in different terms of service as well. One of the things you want to be keenly aware of as you're choosing these various tools is go read their privacy policies, their terms of service. I know they're annoyingly long and full of legalese, but they're going to be different between those various services potentially, about retention, how long they're going to keep your chats for. Even if you sign up for the enterprise version of X tool, they are most likely still keeping and capturing your data for some amount of time, just because they're either using it for some kind of analytics or some kind of troubleshooting. If you have a problem or if there's some kind of issue, they want to be able to go back and get that. Now they hopefully are getting rid of your data afterwards, but nothing's a certainty in this world. Your data has left your building, is now no longer technically under your control. We are now hoping that they're abiding by their terms of service. They wouldn't be in business otherwise if they weren't. So that's one thing that can help console you a little bit. Now, as talking about these various models, you want to evaluate their trustworthiness. If you are doing an AI project, there are different models that you're out there to pick from. Now, there's not the, I think, JJ mentioned this in his talk, the not one model to rule them all. I'm also a big believer in there's specific models for specific kinds of tasks, and typically you're going to combine multiple models simultaneously to accomplish what you need. I'd recommend you check out these couple leaderboards. I will post these slides up onto probably X and LinkedIn after the talk, so that way you can get to these specific links. But there are some links here. For example, the LLM safety leaderboard. What's important on this leaderboard is they're going to go after, they've tried to benchmark each of the models against each other and looking for these various aspects of like toxicity or stereotyping, privacy and ethics and fairness. Obviously, these tools are not infallible, but this is a good first pass, or at least something you should keep you should be open to as you are attempting to evaluate which models you should be using for what kinds of tasks. Maybe you don't really care about like the toxicity bit because you're doing something that will never touch maybe your end customers, or you're not chatting directly, but it performs well in some other aspect of that service. If we also look, of course here we go. In that leaderboard, there was a link to this page on Hugging Face's site. I would highly recommend reading it as well. The Decoding Trust is going to go over all the various aspects, what they mean, kind of diving deeper on each of these bits of the leaderboard benchmark itself. So check that out. It will be a good tool for you as you are going on this journey. And then, let's see. And then no more leaderboards. If we're evaluating not only trustworthiness, which I kind of put first, then performance. How are these tools going to perform against a set of benchmarks? Again, very similar set of tools over here. If we go back, yes. Yes, so there's the leaderboard here actually looks like this one may have just gotten archived and I got a bad link. So I'll have to update the link in the slide deck. But Hugging Face, again, has numerous leaderboards that are really helpful for you to evaluate the effectiveness of these models. That's the safety one again. And there's the chatbot arena. You can see these change on a week by week, if not daily basis. You can see Grok 3 up there at the top. Everyone's heard of Colossus now, like the biggest GPU data center ever built. Well, you put more hardware toward the problem, you get more performance out of these kinds of tools. Who's tried Grok 3 in the room? I don't have much experience with it. I'm kind of a Claude 3.7 person myself when I'm just like chatting, trying to solve my kind of problems. But yeah, you can see that the Claude 3.7 didn't even make the list up here because it's changing so fast. So it's interesting. And then the open source question. We all know that there's these commercial proprietary models. They aren't releasing what their weights are. They aren't releasing what their training sets are. You want to be careful when someone says they are fully open source. They may only be giving you the open weights, which is useful. You may have other tooling where those weights matter, and you'll be able to pull those in and actually use them kind of as companion tools to other things. But I was kind of surprised. I'd not actually experienced using the IBM Granite models yet, but that was interesting because during his talk he said, or actually before I was talking to JJ, they list off the sources of data that are in those models. Like the time series data, there's a very specific list. You can go and analyze it. You can go and rebuild that model if you wanted to spend that much money. But you could reproduce the experiment. Thinking about it like as an academic paper, you want to be able to reproduce the findings that some other researcher got. The truly open source models are going to enable you to do that. So again, be careful what people are calling open source, because you may be getting just open parameters or some other thing, like it's just available. For example, like the llama models, you may get the weights, and some of them you may not even get the weights for it. Now, if you've got these models available to you, you want to bring your data to it. We'll talk about a couple of different techniques for this, but one of the big things you want to do is have the biggest challenge probably in all of AI right now is not the models so much for us, because we're the end users of these tools. It's going to be getting our data in a way that these models can make sense of it and use it. If you all sat in on John's talk about RAG, I'm sure you all heard him talk about chunking. And being able to get your data into a format that makes sense for your kind of problem you're solving. And these don't always, it doesn't always mean your data will be used the same way it's the second time you do a project, because you've got different end goals. You really have to think about the whole big picture of the kind of questions you're trying to answer, so you can make sure you get your data into the right shape to be able to use with these embedding models or with these various LLM models. There's different context window considerations. Some models perform well on a large context window. some models don't. I mean, I hope everyone kind of understands like tokens. As you put in a prompt or as you feed a bunch of context or text into one of these models, you've got a limited number of tokens. You got to make the best use of that. And some of them, even if they advertise a very large context window, they may be doing different things with the beginning, the end, and the middle. May have different effects on the importance of the text you threw into that window. So through experimentation, you're going to learn how these models will actually work best. Now, one key bit here, if you're using a middle-of-the-road default model, for example, like for embeddings, we'll talk about embeddings a little further, but if you're using like the default model, like just a standard transformer syntax embeddings models, you can expect very average results. If you have a very specific use case, for example, you're trying to detect addresses or trying to detect specific kinds of numbers or currency, or you're looking at multilingual, you're going to want to pick specific embedding models that can give you the right kind of results that are going to actually help you solve your problems faster. Yeah, I talked about the embedding leaderboards. So in addition to the LLM large language model leading boards up on Hugging Face, there's also embeddings leaderboards. So given your kind of problem, you may want to check out these leaderboards to see which models are currently ranking best for those kinds of problems. So as I mentioned, like if you've got a problem that looks like a financial analysis problem, you're going to want to look at embeddings models that have been trained with that kind of data. If you're looking at time series data, you're going to want to look for models that have been trained against that time series data. It's not just a one-size-fits-all. You will get, again, if you look at the average, you're going to get very average and very mediocre results. And no one wants that. We all want the best from our models. But that starts with you making these kinds of decisions up front. It's really kind of interesting. There's, like, for example, if you're really focused on multilingual, make sure you're looking at, again, the superior options for multilingual type operations. Now, some of you all may want to fine-tune a model. You may think that's the answer. If we're looking at bringing our data, like we've got a giant, big vat of data, we're going to have our large language model now be aware of. I would caution you because you may think fine-tuning may be the best way to go. I still think RAG may be a better option when we're talking about transformer models and bringing lots of data that's rapidly changing. For example, if you're writing an application, it's typically not going to be very static. You may be reacting to new data on it coming into the system continually. And we'll talk about feedback loops and actually being able to use those feedback loops to make your RAG source even more better or more enriched. But if you are doing something where fine-tuning makes sense, for example, image classification. This is an area where you actually might want to use fine-tuning. For example, like with Google's AutoML, it's really easy to build up a system that can classify images. For example, maybe you're looking for specific kinds of document types, and you may visually be inspecting the document type because it's sets of forms, they've got different structures. You can now train that model to identify relatively quickly with even small sample sizes, maybe only a handful or 1,000 or so documents. You can actually get pretty reasonable results. But you're going to be on the fine-tuning treadmill. Once you jump on, you need to be continually fine-tuning and retuning these models as you want to basically provide more labeled feedback into these kinds of models. So for things like image categorization or anomaly detection, fine-tuning and training probably does make sense. And then you're kind of more in a traditional machine learning workflow where you need to have ML ops and these kinds of things, but be prepared for that as you are looking for this. Fine-tuning is going to be potentially data hungry, costly, time-consuming. If you don't have access to GPUs, it could take even more time to be able to train these models. Not that it's impossible, but that's how we've approached, for example, document classification. Back into RAG. One of the nice things about RAG is it enables us to try and fight against hallucinations and those half-truths. We can use the retrieval augmented generation to pull in true data we know or have crowdsourced, or it's our FAQs, it's our internal documentation, and we've gone and chunked it up appropriately. And so RAG is using vectors. And there's, again, nothing's magic here. It is literally taking your text, converting it into a long string of numbers that makes sense in the models and allows all this kind of what feels like magic to actually work under the covers. But again, it's just math. We're looking at semantic similarities, trying to detect when something looks like another thing. And if you've heard of the vectors, talk about like clustering, so being able to pick out some number of documents that are nearby to what the meaning of your prompt you put into the system was. That's what we're going to be doing with the vectors here. But again, you have to have good data in your RAG system for this all to work and to really perform as you would expect it to. How many of you all have come across PDF files that were produced like on InDesign, inside your organization? Like some desktop publishing software has produced these things. You know, when people want to hide text inside of desktop publishing software, sometimes they just drag a white box over the top of that text. Well, let me tell you, that text is still in the PDF, and you're going to get it if you aren't looking visually at the pages. Now, if you're just trying to parse PDFs in a more raw, like strings type format, be prepared for a very bad day because you're going to get people dragging text off to the side to try and hide it and not use it because that's old data. We'll pull the old data over here. Well, the old data is still there. And so these are things and considerations as you go and put together your RAG system, is understanding the data that's coming in and being able to effectively clean it and get it to work for you. The data storage can be basically, there's lots of open source and commercial options. I'll give a list of them right here. Each of them come with obviously trade-offs and scalability options. One of my favorites is PG Vector. We use that for most of the projects that we're actually on right now. We're going to do a demo here in about 2 slides where I use ChromaDB, which is basically SQLite with a nice vector database layer layered on top of it, which means it runs embedded on your own system. You don't need to fire up any fancy applications. It's just like SQLite. You don't have to fire up a relational database. You just get to read a file and it all just kind of works. There are options in from Elastic and Mongo, so you probably can talk to the Elastic folks right outside this door. And then the commercial versions. I put Weaviate and Milvus in the commercial side of that. They are open, but with a commercial option. So again, be careful as you choose based on licenses. Be careful as you choose based on the activity and the vibrancy of the communities. You want to be able to choose tools that are going to go with you for the long run. And so you want to make sure they've got good support, good communities. I'm a big believer in open source, but there's lots of orphaned open source projects out there. Don't get trapped by thinking this one happens to solve exactly the one piece I need, but it's just obviously one guy, and then the guy is like, I'm not doing this anymore, and so then you're kind of stuck. So be careful there. And then the retrieval part. So RAG relies on taking that query, converting it into an embedding itself, going off and doing the query against your vector database, and bringing back that content into your context window. Now, this is again up for you all to manage. There are kind of magic tools. Who's made a ChatGPT GPT or like a Claude like project where you've dragged PDF files up into the thing and it just kind of makes a little bit of magic happen and you feel like you've gotten it. Those are great starting points, but if you really, really want to hone in on a true RAG system, you're going to take this to the next level and probably start experimenting with tools like ChromaDB or PG Vector to get the most out of that, because those are fairly limiting. They don't do the chunking for you. They don't understand your data as well as you understand your data. So you're going to be making decisions about how your data is used in these systems. All right, now the fun part. There is a GitHub repository underneath the 6FEUP organization. This was for a conference I was at last year, but I felt like the demo is still relevant today. So it was for the Good Tech Fest conference. I talked about using RAG in an LLM presentation. Again, if you just go to 6FEUP's.org, or you can scan that QR code, that will take you to the same spot. What I want to show is a quick demo. It's a little cut off. I think it'll be okay. All right. I'll do the demo first, and I'll show a little bit of code. Perfect. So in this case, I'm using OpenAI under the covers. So I've got a local RAG running with ChromaDB. I have sucked in their website. Okay, the thing for conference, or anybody organize conferences in the room? Okay, please, please, please find better websites than some of these like automatic conference generator websites, because they generate terrible data for you to suck into these kinds of systems. So we did a lot of like massaging of the data to get this to actually work correctly. But so what conference are we at? So it should tell you Good Tech Fest, because that's one it should be aware of. But we basically spidered their website and then split the website into semantic, meaningful content based on the HTML structure. We did one further. So another thing about this website, sorry, Andrew, if you're listening, Good Tech Fest organizer, I love you, but your site was terrible. The speaker page for this specific site, it's not up right now. They've moved on to next year's data. would take an image of the speaker and put the speaker's name in the image and what they were talking on in the image itself. Like, it wasn't like text on the page. So you couldn't go to the page and just search for Calvin and find if I was a speaker on that page. You would have to literally visually scan the page. So what we did is we sucked in all those images, sent them to OpenAI and said, read the name of the speaker off this image, and then sent that to an API on LinkedIn to go grab their bio and all their experience, and pulled that biographic data into our RAG so we could actually get more information about the speakers than what was on the site. So one of the key bits here is like those kinds of tools, that agentic AI piece here is really powerful for enriching data along the way. And that's what we did. Who are the featured speakers? And so this is encoding what I just said into a vector, querying my vector database to pull up the list of whatever pages in this set of data were relevant to speakers, and then found like these are the featured speakers from that site. Let's see here, is speaking. So hopefully, cross your fingers. Oh yeah, I am. I did speak at that conference. Now, this is what I found to be the real magic of a tool like this. Sure, I've got now awesome access to query, like what topics were being talked about at the conference, but check this out. Who I love meeting people, and I want to know who I should go meet because they got similar interests. I want who? Tell me who. Oh, there it is. Okay, so at the very bottom there, it's saying specifically I should go talk to these specific people because they are there and they have something in common with me that I should go talk about. So being able to leverage that AI now to get people together because of similarities, which is really good at, is actually a really powerful bit here. One thing I want to show next, so that was all using OpenAI, which is an API. Luckily, the internet was working and all of that was good. I'm going to switch over. Oh, I take that back. That was not OpenAI. That was actually local on my machine. That was actually using Ollama to use the Llama 3.2 local model running on my MacBook Pro. This is a 4-year-old MacBook Pro that can run large language models like nobody's business. And it was fast. So fast I thought I was on OpenAI's version of the API. And the quality is pretty good. So literally, if you're in the code and you want to play with this, you can uncomment the OpenAI section of this, and now you'll be using the APIs out to the internet to do that. I was demoing this earlier before, making sure it was ready, because I wanted to make that huge reveal. But now you all got to see it. It was actually like locally running on my own machine, which is pretty cool. Another cool thing you can do on your own machine. Who's played with Mistral Small? This is pretty incredible. So I love startup ideas. Build me a Django app for a neighborhood tool sharing program. This is also running on my local MacBook, my 4-year-old local MacBook. It's the little thinking icons off to the side. There we go. So it's cool, it creates me a Django install, starts me a Django application, adds a Django app to the application, and now it actually starts building the models. So if you've ever done Django work, it's going to be a models.py, and it'll give me a Django admin, does the make migrations. So if you were using a tool like Aider, like one of the coding assistants and agents, it would actually stop you and run each of these bits along the way, which means you could use Mistral Small locally on your own machine with these coding tools like Aider and Cursor, and not ever have it go out to the internet. This is not using any internet at all to give me back this whole set of code. This just got generated right on my computer live in front of you. Again, super fun, super cool. That code, again, is all on GitHub. The kind of fun bits really in here that you want to look at are the fact that the CLI is kind of cool because it's got a word completer in there. You can tab complete words like conference and talk and moderator. But we do have a system prompt in here if you're kind of looking for examples of how you would go and leverage a tool like this to build your own prompts. We want to make sure that it's a guided experience. For example, people will call things talks, some people will call them presentations, some people will call them sessions. Well, in your system prompt, you need to make sure you tell people about these kinds of things. So it gives you a good basis for building some internal AI apps like this. You could take this and wrap it into a UI like Chainlit or some of those kind of tools like that, and actually make a web interface for this as well if you're so inclined. Oh yeah, we're still building back here. It's actually giving me HTML now. This is what's incredible about the new local models is the context window that it gives you on the output is so much bigger than it used to be. If I showed you a demo from like Llama 2, it had like an 8K output window. We would have described the project and stopped. Like you wouldn't have gotten any of this. Hey, there we go. And actually now it's like visit localhost 8000 and then let's go. That's just, again, kind of mind-blowing how far we've come in just a couple years with these sets of tools. All right. And then the feedback loop. So one of the interesting things we've done on projects as well is provide some observability. And it's something you want to consider is when you're deploying these kinds of tools either internally or externally to your customers, having a feedback loop where you track the questions, the prompts people put into your chatbot, the responses that your large language model and you combined with your RAG may give back to your end users. You want to be able to rate and rank those, for example. These were good answers, these were mediocre answers, and these were poor answers. And then in real time, feed those back into your RAG. If there's a common answer that's really good, or if there's a commonly asked question and the response is typically terrible, you can write, we implemented this for one of our customers, was the ability to write in what the correct kind of official answer would be. And now that becomes part of the RAG corpus that is used to answer further questions that may be related to that. So you can, in real time, improve the output of these tools by leveraging RAG really effectively. Another piece that you want to be able to do is put in like an ability to A/B test different models simultaneously. For example, on that project I was talking about where we put the observability in there, it was a agricultural seed manufacturer who wanted to basically take 50 years of agricultural farm knowledge they published. Every year they publish an almanac-like type book full of data about when to plant cover crops and what's the best furrows for your planter to use and what kind of situations. You want to be able to talk to that but get a reference back to where that citation came from. Like, well, that's in the Practical Farm Research from 2024, Volume 2, Chapter 5, page, whatever. Getting that level of citation, we did this 2 years ago, was now available with RAG. But to be able to tune these models, even the like OpenAI models using their API, there are lots of knobs you'll still be able to tune and tweak and play with. For example, temperature. It's like how creative is the answer coming back to you? We would name we would basically through the Django UI, you could pick and activate different versions of the settings, so you could try and test and trial and A/B test, see which ones are giving you back better answers. And we would name the models after Star Trek characters. So Data was a very, very low, like one on temperature, not very creative, very just the facts. Riker was very passionate about giving you back creative answers. So you had the different models you could kind of trial and test and understand how they were operating. If your application needs to 100% never lie to end users, you may want to consider looking at something like pre-generated answers. So if you've got a FAQ system and you only ever want questions to answer from that FAQ system, leverage it. Not necessarily as RAG that you would send in for what the response would be, as it would be more that the LLMs would help query your FAQ system, and then you'd use the LLMs to format back the response in like plain English if you want it. So that way it can still feel like you're chatting with a bot or a human, but actually getting back only approved, on the record type answers is basically the way to go. It's less creative, you get more control. You basically want to also try and use multiple models maybe behind the scenes. One approach to this can be that you have people who are chatting with your front-end chatbot, but on the backside, you may talk to one model to get an answer, but before you return that answer to your end user, you may actually have another model that's evaluating whether that makes sense or not. And if it doesn't, it may send it back to the previous model and be like, that doesn't make sense, adjust your answer for X, Y, or Z. So having multiple models behind the scenes is actually a technique you can use to get better answers back to your end users. Take some time. You have to tune these things for like latency because you're going to obviously be having lots of little conversations on the backside, but that can actually really enhance the kind of the quality of the answers your system can give back. So now we've got all these kind of cool models. We understand RAG. We're going to pull it all together. We've got our data. We've maybe fine-tuned a model, but we want to be able to build an app now. You probably heard again about like LangChain, Llama Index, Haystack. There's numerous open source frameworks out there which are great to get started. If your problem looks like a LangChain problem, you're using tools and you're chaining them together, that's probably a good fit. If you start going outside of some of these frameworks, you'll probably find yourself starting to fight the framework. So as you scale up, I warn you to maybe go back to first principles and leave some of these abstractions behind. Use them to experiment, to understand what your business problem is, what the problem domain may be, because you'll get a lot of traction really quickly. You'll kind of get that 80-20. You'll get 80% of the way there. That last 20% will take you 80% of the time because it's hard. If you stick with some of those frameworks maybe too long, kind of that sunk cost fallacy, you will probably have a bad time of it. But I recommend them for getting started. I think they're really good for, if you are just dabbling and trying to figure this all out, I recommend those tools. Here's a whole bunch of them and kind of the pros and cons. I will not go over this whole slide because that would take way too long. But there's some cool stuff on here. Like LangChain and LangGraph are really interesting because you're talking about orchestrating LLMs. Being able to orchestrate those tools, talking to LLMs, talking to RAG. These frameworks are going to give you like kind of a bunch of superpowers right away. Once you figure out what superpowers you actually need, that's when you start kind of refactoring and getting back to basics on only doing the bit you need. Like the demo I showed, I actually only used the OpenAPI or OpenAI API library. It was the OpenAI library. We just pip install OpenAI, but I used it with Llama. I don't know if you saw that. Like you can specify a different endpoint, and I used Llama 3.2 as the responses. I didn't use any of these frameworks to build that because it was a simple problem. It required a simple answer. Yeah, I put in my notes here. In many cases, Yagni, you aren't going to need it, so be careful. Then there's conversational AI frameworks. For example, I showed off using a simple REPL, like a Python type REPL style prompt interface, but you could build in web UIs around it. There's a great project called Chainlit. It works well with many of those LLM orchestration frameworks I just mentioned, like LangChain and Llama Index. You can literally like kind of point it at it, and now you've got a web chat UI that looks just like OpenAI's web interface. And then I kind of already talked about this, getting back to first principles. If you get down a road so far, make sure you aren't afraid to kind of push some things aside, take those learnings, and build the right thing. Now, let's talk about deployment. I think we got a perfect 8 minutes. This should work. We're going to make it. If you're looking at a service route, say for example you're okay with just deploying ChatGPT or Claude to your end users, you're happy with them using those kinds of services, you may still want the ability to put in guardrails or checks or kind of consolidated budgets or limits. You may want in the enterprise, you're probably going to want a little more control or a little more accountability for these kinds of tools. And there's things out there like the open source project called Light LLM allows you to centralize access as a proxy out to these tools like ChatGPT or Claude from Anthropic, but provide your own guardrails. You can provide other additional system prompts that can be injected along the way that now match maybe your corporate privacy or acceptable use policies, all as part of the deployment. And one thing you're going to need to do is think about what is your AI policy. I'll talk a little bit more about this in a second when it comes to governance, but that'll be important when defining how you're going to use a tool like a Light LLM as a service proxy. If you want to deploy these kind of applications, you've got a couple options. You've got on-premises, where you're going to require basically a lot of GPU and a lot of memory. If you think about the DeepSeek R1 model, if you wanted to run the full bore version of that, you need like 200 plus gigabytes of video RAM. Well, not one graphics card has that much on it. You're going to need now a GPU network. Who in here are ops people who run like data centers? Yeah. So, like that at one point we went and we moved to storage networks because we needed fast storage just for the storage network, in addition to the network of our computers talking to each other. You now are going to have a GPU network that is dedicated to just GPUs. You're talking at like 400 to 800, and up gigabits per second type access to make sure that they can talk, because basically they need to hold the whole model sharded up in memory all at once for this to actually work. Welcome to a lot of pain. So that's why I recommend the cloud. Cloud is a good option because they do a lot of that for you. And there's different options for doing this in the cloud, like doing it yourself in the cloud, or actually, I think that's what my next slide is. That self-hosted version of it, I recommend Kubernetes for an orchestration layer. Being able to deploy in containers is super convenient, but you can now rent GPUs on some public cloud someplace, pay a lot of money, and now you're self-hosting your models. You may want to look at endpoints as a service. These are nice because they basically give you an OpenAI generally compatible interface. So now you can switch between various models very, very quickly, and you just pay per usage. So you pay typically by the token, or by 10,000 tokens or 100,000 tokens, whatever that may be. And then there's hosted models. If you want to have in the cloud, but your version of Claude, you can do that with tools like Amazon's Bedrock. And Hugging Face Spaces, for example, will host like more of the open source versions of those kinds of things. So it is possible for you to get your own instance of one of these models. They're typically hosted by some large cloud provider who's made an agreement with OpenAI or Anthropic to make these kind of things possible. But your data is now in the cloud. So as I mentioned, if your data leaves the building, you need to be concerned with what happens to it after that. I will recommend setting up an AI acceptable use policy, but beyond that, you're going to want to perform a multi-phased assessment of what's going on in your enterprise as far as like a risk assessment. Likelihood versus severity. It's going to take, basically, you're going to need to spend some time and think about what data you have, what impact it has if it got out, what is the likelihood of someone actually trying to attack vector, get a hold of this kind of data. And you need an inventory of what data is in your enterprise. Then you need to define governance. So establishing roles and responsibilities, and then communicating those, engaging those people who are in your organization so that they understand what that policy actually is. Hosting feedback sessions, being able to actually get people to understand that as you type into these boxes in ChatGPT and Claude, where that data is going and what the potential side effects could be of that being outside your firewall. And then the last phase that's really important is that you monitor and adapt. So making sure you're tracking what people are doing with that data. So tools like LiteLLM can help with that, because then you get analytics. I know the enterprise versions of Claude and ChatGPT give you some analytics dashboards as well. You're going to need to look at them and understand what your usage patterns actually look like, and potentially give your end users better service because you're able to track and adapt to what their needs may be. And that's kind of the main bits here. Now, scaling your applications, I mentioned this as well. You're going to want to take those real-time metrics of people who are using your application and understand, again, where your bottlenecks are. Without that kind of technical data, instrumentation data in your application, you're flying blind. I mean, the first thing you can do is add hardware. That's a good quick fix, but it won't be the end fix. Typically, you're going to need to do some kind of refactoring, some kind of expose inefficiencies, look for those various bottlenecks, set up performance testing so that you can actually understand where this thing is falling down, and actually probably reduce costs at that point because you're now refactoring based on actual use cases. And then investing in ML ops and LLM ops. So if there's DevOps people in the room, you've still got a job because people need to be able to basically quickly rinse, repeat, and release new code as they go. And you want that to all be automated. We don't want humans doing the part we're not good at, which is deploying software. We're good at writing it, we're not great at deploying it. I can tell you that for sure. All right, with that all said, I think I have 2 minutes left. Something I didn't mention, it is on this takeaway. If your organization doesn't have an AI guild or a center of excellence in-house, you should be looking at setting one up now. This is where you're going to see a lot of potential in-house innovation, get people thinking about the problem and getting on board with moving in the same direction. We have multiple guilds inside of our even small organization, like a backend guild, a DevOps guild, a service delivery guild. An AI guild or a chief AI officer who's leading that charge is going to help you get a lot more traction and get a lot further down the road to getting these tools into production and in true usage inside your organizations. And then challenge your teams to use them. I challenge my team every day to use, we're a software shop, so I challenge them to try out new coding tools. Like I learned about Goose yesterday from Angie on stage. I was like, who's not using this yet? We need to be like checking this out. I've been a big fan of Aider, and so getting people engaged and using the tools and using them within the acceptable use policies that we've set up so that people are doing it responsibly and with the understanding of how we treat certain data from certain places and understanding that threat model. And with that, I think I made it in 50 minutes. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.